Well, hello again. So now we've covered some of the basic biology, and we're going to continue on just a little bit more with some immunity. So, immunity, you've probably all heard about this because of COVID everywhere, but immunity, and we talked about it a little bit with Dr. Jenner, who created the first vaccine, but immunity is what your body does to protect you. And it's evolved over thousands of millennia. And there's two types. So the first type is called innate immunity, and the second type is called specific or adaptive immunity. So today we're only going to talk about the innate immunity. And what innate means is just that, like, we're born with this. There's nothing specific at all about it. It's the things that, like, if anything gets in, it says whammo, no, you don't belong here. We're getting you out. So that's what the innate system is. So its function is just to recognize and eliminate anything that's foreign. So they call it an antigen if it gets in your body and it triggers this immune response. So an antigen is any substance that causes the body to make an immune response. So this is kind of like circular, right? It's immune system is an immune response anyway. So an antigen can be anything. And that can include toxins, like if you get, you breathe in a toxin, or it could be chemical. If you get a chemical on your skin or chemical in your eyes or anything, your immune response is just going to go crazy on. And it also does so with bacteria and viruses. And then any other substance that comes from outside the body. So I have a picture here of, I'm thinking sticker, a splinter. So in this case, there's a finger, it's got a little splinter in it, and you can see the redness, there might be a little swelling there. And you've experienced this, no doubt. Or you get a cut. And when you get a cut, there's a little bit of bacteria, either from your skin or from your environment, that gets inside, and so your body says whack, no, you can't come in. So your body mounts an immune response. So as I mentioned, there are two types of immunity. One, which we're talking about today, is non-specific or innate, meaning it's inherent, it's present before the infection. Your body has just got some things in there to help protect you. And then the second type that we'll talk about later is specific or adaptive, and that develops in response to something specific, and it's a specific attack against a specific antigen, one that you've seen before generally. All right. So innate immunity is non-specific bodily defense. And here's what our immune system looks like, kind of just an overview. At the top, we see immune system. And on your left-hand side, there is innate, non-specific first line of defense. And then under that, there are cellular and humoral meaning liquid, components to it. And then on the adaptive side, that's the specific, which is the second line of defense. Doesn't mean it's second in effectiveness. It just means it comes a little bit later after that innate or specific, non-specific defense. And it too has cellular and humoral components, cellular and liquid components. So again, what we're talking about today is the innate non-specific defense with cellular and humoral liquid components, and we'll get through all of those. So we have external and internal. In addition to cellular and humoral, there's, both in both areas. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the external non-specific defense. So, we have a body, and there are things that help protect us from things getting in, obviously our skin. And then there are things that we have internally. So if something actually does get in, like that splinter or like those toxins or chemicals, then the non-specific can get to work on those if they get in. But first, how do we protect ourselves just in general? Well, we have skin, and the skin is made up of basically an epidermis and a dermis. That's what we're talking about as far as innate immunity. The epidermis has multiple layers of skin cells, and they're all packed up together, and that creates a border all around us. Now, the skin covers our bones and our organs, which is great for us, but it's also protecting us from anything getting inside. If we were an amoeba, I mean, they're subject to all the things that are floating around in the water that could get into them. So we have an advantage. Remember, we're eukaryote, so yay, we're the more advanced. All right, so the epidermis has multiple layers of packed cells, and the very top layer, if you've heard about anything cosmetic procedures or whatever, that you have a thick, dry, tough region on your skin, and that's what you put lotion on for. But it's mostly dead cells along the first couple layers of your skin. And so in the cosmetic thing, they're always saying, "Oh, we'll remove all your dead skin layers," and that's what loofahs are for, and all of that. And you can't totally get rid of them because they're attached. I mean, unless you get some strong peel or get a burn or something like that. But anyway, pathogens can't get in because they're so packed, they're stacked up, they're packed together, intermingled, all of that. So when you use a washcloth, or when you wash your hands, or even when you put lotion on, that will sometimes remove some of the dead cells. And inside those dead cells, there's microbes, viruses, a little fungi, a little bit of bacteria that just are hanging out there. I mean, we have it normally, and it's a good thing, but there's also pathogens that can be landing on our skin as well. So those get sloughed off. So washing your hands is good. Here's just a couple of images. The first one is an electron micrograph, and you can see those are some of the kind of dead cells, epidermal cells. And down below is a scanning electron micrograph of the epidermal cells. These are not necessarily the dead ones. You can see they're kind of a little more puffy, and they have what's inside them. They have these dendritic cells, which are the kind of figure-like things that are all spreading around in there. But we'll talk about the dendritic cells a little bit later too. All right, so we talked about your skin and the first layer, which is the epidermis, and now let's get down to the dermis. So the dermis has collagen, which are protein fibers, and that gives your skin strength and pliability, which helps us in an immune way, because if our skin was not pliable, in other words, every time you moved it, it broke. I mean, every time you'd flex your fingers in and out, you'd have broken skin on your fingers. And then it has strength so that you can do that. You can move your skin, you can kind of pinch your skin, you can do all of that, and it has some strength to it, so it doesn't just rip apart. Now, when you get older, then it does start to, you lose a lot of your epidermis and your dermis, and the collagen in particular. And that's beauty treatments are always talking about. It increases your collagen because the collagen is what kind of puffs you up, and it keeps it keeps that strength and that pliability to your skin. And as you get older, I'm sure you know someone who's kind of old and their skin is sagging, it has wrinkles, or it's just not. I mean, if you look at a baby, have you ever seen how puffy a baby's hand is? Okay, they've got tons of collagen, and it's going to last for a couple of years, and then it starts to fade. But even 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds are kind of a little bit more puffy. When we get to be adults, our skin is much thinner, and then as we get old, it's even thinner still. So what else is in the dermis besides collagen are sweat glands. And we have these obviously underarms and all kinds of, normal places that we think of, but there are sweat glands kind of all over it. If you've ever worked out really heavily at the gym or ran outside when it's like 105, like it is now, you sweat in lots of other places. And inside the sweat glands, inside sweat, if you will, you've probably heard you've got to replace your electrolytes, and that's because there is salt in that sweat. And what the salt is there for is to kill microbes. So when you're sweating, you're sweating, and there's that liquid, and first it's kind of helping to wash them off, but the salt in them is also killing them. So microbes, bacteria in particular, and fungi, they don't like salt, and if they're trying to live in an environment where there's salt, they're just not usually very successful. And also in sweat is a chemical called lysozyme. And zyme is an enzyme, which means it's splitting up things. And lysozyme breaks up the sugar subunits, which are found in cell walls. Now remember, bacteria cells have cell walls and we don't. So obviously, cell walls are going to be broken in the bacteria, but not in us. So that's perfect. What a great system. So that's sweat, collagen, salt, and lysozyme. But the dermis also contains biochemical defense agents. So we have sebaceous glands, and I'm sure you've heard of those because that's what secretes lots of different chemicals and enzymes. And you might get enlarged sebaceous glands or pockets when you experience acne. They get a little plugged, but they secrete chemicals and enzymes. Remember, chopping up to inhibit growth on microbes that are sitting there on your skin. Your dermis also contains lactic acid and fatty acids, which help to lower the pH on your skin. So your skin is actually more acidic than our body is. So the skin pH is 5.6 to 6.4, whereas our blood and most of our body fluids is around 7. I mean, it's a little bit different, but we kind of just say 7 is the midpoint. So the skin can be much more acidic depending on the region. And bacteria, again, fungi and viruses, they don't like acidic environments. So there we go, body. Thanks for helping us out. All right. And we also are resistant, just in general, to most plant and animal pathogens because our temperature and pH is different than plants and animals. So I don't remember exactly what it is, but dogs have a little bit higher temperature than we do. Most animals do. I'm not saying that it's higher, but it's just different. And so there are organisms that are specific to us. They exactly love 98.6 or 37 degrees Fahrenheit, Celsius. And so they don't necessarily infect animals, and they don't necessarily infect other plants. And the same is true vice versa. So that's why when your cat has distemper, you don't get it because it's a cat specific virus. And there are, it binds only to cat receptors, but the pH and the temperature of the cat has another influence. They have innate and specific immunity as well. All right. So also within your dermal cells are phagocytic cells, also called dendritic cells. So phagocytic means eat cells. Phago is eat and cytic is cell, Latin. And so these are basically cell eaters. We also call them dendritic cells because they have all these little finger-like networks. You can see in this particular image, the cell is the main body, and then that network helps it to spread out in your dermis, or sometimes as far up as your epidermis. But and they are there to just capture anything that gets down a little bit further. So they're gonna notice it. Like this is within seconds. The innate immune system, it just happens quickly, and it's just all of a sudden there's something in there, and they're like, beep, 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 red alert, red alert. And so they go in and they attack whatever it is. There's also chemicals called cytokines, and those kind of spread throughout your body, and they call in the cavalry. And so all the cells are like, uh-oh, location 5G, we've got an invader, let's go get it. So that's the dendritic or phagocytic cells. So here's a phagocytic cell, and let's see if we can click on it for the animation. Sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't. Let's see. Not sure it's going to work. All right. Well, what I'll do is, oops, maybe there it's going. Let's see. Sorry for the delay. We'll just pause on that. But in the I'll post it on Canvas so you can see it there. All right, this is a histology or a section of an electron micrograph of, well, actually, no, this is just a regular light microscope section of skin. And you can see the line that's kind of up on the top. That's your epidermis. And those are the packed cells that are all just jumbled in there really tightly. And then the lower layer where it has the cells, that is your dermis. And then these cells that are stained kind of reddish and they have some kind of finger-like. You can see one kind of right here in the center. They have those finger-like projections. So those are all just standing guard there, waiting for something to invade. And like I said, it happens within seconds. Those cells can obviously move around in the dermis and go in and start chomping away on some invader. All right, we also have, in addition to skin, which has our epidermis and our dermis, we also have mucous membranes. And mucous membranes line all of our cavities or any substance, any area that is exposed to the outside. So obviously in your mouth, in your nose, lower nether regions, as my daughter calls them. So all of those areas have mucous membranes, and that includes like your throat too. And those help in if something gets in, again, in one of those open areas, there we go, respiratory, urinary, digestive, reproductive. And they can, they help in a couple of different ways. So they're tightly packed, but but they're a thin layer rather than the epidermis, which has, like a lot of thick cells. They are living and they're constantly shedding. So anything that gets in there gets shed off with the cells as they go. Your trachea also has what are called goblet cells, and they have a really sticky mucus. You know about this when you have a cold, right? Because what they're doing is they're producing lots and lots of mucus to get, to bind or capture all of those yucky microbes. And then you have ciliated columnar cells, and I'll show you an image of that. But what those are, cilia is like flagella, remember, but it's coordinated movement. So they're constantly sweeping like your trachea, and they're sweeping all this stuff up, and then they sweep it, and then you swallow it. And what happens to it then? Well, your stomach acid happens to it. So, your stomach acid pretty much takes care of almost anything that gets down there. So, and then also you have mucus there. And again, like I said, when you have a cold, you're very well aware of this, but mucus also has that chemical lysozyme, which helps to cut up cell walls. And so that's helpful there as well. So this is cilia, and this is like our respiratory system, basically. And you can see on the right-hand side how thick those cilia are. And again, they coordinate together and they just sweep up. And these are all through your, like your respiratory system, as it shows right there. You have your nasal cavity, your pharynx, your epiglottis, goes down to your esophagus, trachea, bronchus, and bronchioles. So, all of that is lined because all of that can have an exposure to the outside. We breathe in air all the time and there's junk in the air everywhere. I mean, I'm staying with my daughter in Lincoln now, and she just bought a new home, but the homes all around her are being built. And my gosh, it's just so dusty here all the time. So I know I'm breathing in tons of that stuff. And thankfully, my columnar cells are having me swallow it. Yay. All right, so this is just another image. This is the cilia, and this, you can see that here's a little bacterium that's in there, and they're going to sweep that up. So we won't have to worry about that anymore. All right, so we've covered all the external, which was the skin, including the epidermis and the dermis, and the mucous membranes, which have mucus and lysozyme and cover all the areas that are exposed to the air, except for the skin, which is its own mechanism. So let's talk a little bit about what's inside, what's internal. So this is when, this goes into its own defense when the pathogen has penetrated either the skin or the mucous membranes or both. Excuse me. And we have 4 things that I'm going to talk about: blood cells, other cells, chemicals, and inflammation. So remember, we've got cellular and humoral components to both the innate and the specific or adaptive immunity. So we'll talk about some cells here, and those are the blood cells. So what is blood? Probably you remember this, but blood is made up of cells and plasma. Plasma is the liquid portion, and you have lots of different kinds of cells, and all the cells are made in the bone marrow. But The most common one you see are the erythrocytes. Those are the red blood cells. When you bleed, that's what you see the most of. And they are the most numerous, thankfully, because they're the ones who carry oxygen. Then we have inside those, inside your blood, there are also platelets. And platelets are what help you to clot. So if you get a cut, you're bleeding, you're bleeding. Pretty soon, if it's small enough, it just stops bleeding pretty quickly. If you have a large cut, takes a while longer, but eventually you do clot. I mean, unless you have, cannonball or something in you, then that's not going to work because you'll bleed out before you have enough platelets there. But platelets are there to stop you from bleeding. So they're cells that just coagulate and close up the wound there. All right, the next one you have is leukocytes. So leukocytes are white blood cells. We also have lymphocytes, which are also white blood cells, and monocytes, which I didn't list here, sorry. But we will talk about the white blood cells in totality. Now, leukocytes, there's several different types of leukocytes. And lymphocytes are really involved in immunity, but they're involved in the specific immunity. So we're not going to talk about them today. We're pretty much going to talk about the leukocytes. So erythrocytes and platelets, we're not going to talk about much more because they have different functions than the white blood cells. So here's just a graphic little cartoon of blood cells. On the left, you see platelets, which are also called officially thrombocytes. And then we have red blood cells, which are erythrocytes. And then we have white blood cells. And there's several types, as I mentioned. On the top row, we have basophils. And they're called that because they look, when you stain them in the typical stain that's used in laboratories, they stain blue. And then we have neutrophils, which don't stain really a very deep or dark color of any kind. And then on the right, we have eosinophils, which stain red or pink, dark pink, kind of almost hot pink. And then we also have monocytes and lymphocytes. So we're first going to talk about the top layer of white cells, which are called the granulocytes. Now, in this image, you can actually see that there are granules inside their cells. And those are important because the granulocytes have chemicals in them. So yay, chemicals to the rescue. So here we go again. This is just another way of saying what I just did. We have granulocytes, which are eosinophils, neutrophils, and basophils. Then we also have monocytes and lymphocytes. So 5 cells total, but we're going to go and talk about granulocytes now. So granulocytes again, neutrophils, basophils, and eosinophils. And this little cartoon image there shows a little bit more accurate picture of what they would look like when they're stained. Okay, so they all have lobes. You can see the nucleus there is divided into lobes. The eosinophil usually only has 2. Basophil typically has 2, sometimes 3, and sometimes just 1 big lob. And neutrophils usually have 5 or 6. Just that's just how the nucleus is broken into segments, if you will. Excuse me. So what these white blood cells do when there is an invader is they do something called diapedesis. Anybody know what ped means? Pedesis. Ped is foot. So what they do is they move. What they do is, this is an image of a blood vessel. And you can see that the yellow cells there are cells that are lining the blood vessel. When you get a cut, if you will, those endothelial cells that are lining the blood vessel, they kind of split apart a tiny, tiny bit because there's chemicals in there that are telling them to do so. It's like, okay, just get a little bit leaky there. And then what those granulocytes do is they travel through that blood cell. Now, that is the process called diapedesis, them actually moving out of the blood vessel. Now, why is this important? Okay, well, you've got blood flowing all around, and hopefully you don't have any injuries or any icky stuff that's gotten inside you, but all of a sudden you step on a nail and, the warning signals, red alert goes out. And so now we've got to get some cells in there to help kill that invader. There's all kinds of bacteria on that nail. There might be iron or other aluminum, nickel. I don't know what's in there, but your body sees it as, oh my gosh, there's something invading. Let's go get it. But cells are all floating around in your bloodstream. So they're like, okay, we're going, but how do we get there? So diapedesis is the mechanism which they get there. There's the cells in that area, again, are sending out the red alert, and the granulocytes all start, they're flowing. And when they reach this area, this section where the warning is, they start squeezing out. They squeeze through those endothelial cells and they go into the tissue. Okay. So then what they do is they send out their granules. They have other chemicals. I think here is, yeah, they have cytokines, which is calling in the cavalry. And then they have granules, which also have chemicals that help to call in more and also alert the phagocytes, which are the eating cells, to start chomping away on bad stuff in here. So anyway, that's diapedesis, and that's the mechanism for any kind of entry in just a general way. And like I said, this starts happening within seconds. And you might also, well, let me get back into inflammation a little bit later, but that will be part of it. All right, so what do monocytes do when this is happening? So the granulocytes have, got in, they've diapedesed through the blood vessel, they've gotten into the area, and they're sending out granules, killing the organism, sending out signals, help, come in, let's get it. And the monocytes do the same thing. They leave the blood and they go into that area, and then they mature and they become those macrophages, those eating cells. So they start devouring all that bacteria or any of the other junk, even chemicals or dirt or anything else that's there. Okay. Then there's also some monocytes that are called wandering monocytes, and those two are floating around, and they may diapedese. They're just kind of floating around all the time, and they're just checking every part of your tissue, saying, anybody out here? Let's just pick up any old cell debris, whatever, any little bacteria that just we haven't noticed because it wasn't strong enough to create some kind of immune alarm system. And then there's some that are just fixed. So like there's some monocytes that are just sitting along tissues, just fixed right there. And they're just waiting. Like, okay, is there anything coming by? Check your way. Nope. Anything over here? Nope. Check your way. Nope. Nope. Oh, got something. And so then they'll just kind of reach out and grab it, so to speak. And then they can chomp it up. All right, so here are some macrophages or dendritic cells, and they have their little finger-like projections out, and they're just waiting for some, excuse me, for something to float along or something to come by that they need to take care of. They're happy to just sit there and do it. All right, so monocytes again become phagocytes, and they are responsible for elimination or exocytosis. They also get assistance from other cells. So like I said, the granulocytes are helping them to, to kill organisms and, sorry, getting a cough. Probably the dust, right? So the phagocytes just are the ones who are going to be there to chomp up anything that is not good, that we don't want. And this is an image, an electron micrograph image of, or maybe, no, I think this is a fluorescent microscopy image. Yep. And this is, you can see up in the upper left-hand image, there's 9 images here. So in the very first one, you see a bacteria, and one of those finger-like projections has just gone over and grabbed it. And then there's a couple more in the next picture. They've grabbed it. And then in the rest of the images, they're showing that it's just pulling it in, and it's getting closer and closer to the phagocyte, which is eventually going to just, and it's gone. All right, so just a little review. Innate immunity, we have blood cells, right? So there's the monocyte. It's the biggest, it's the big boy, and that's what's going to become a phagocyte. Then we have the 3 granulocytes, the eosinophil, the basophil, and the neutrophil. And all of those have these nice granules in them that help to call in the cavalry and help to kill any of the organisms or other invaders to our body. All right, then I mentioned So we've talked about granulocytes, monocytes, and then lymphocytes. That's the other blood cell type. And we're going to talk about that in the next lecture because lymphocytes are involved with specific immunity, and they'll be important with our immune system and vaccinations and, lots of other things, but we won't talk about them now. All right, so we've talked about the external, we've talked about some of the internal, we've talked about blood. We still have left to talk about chemicals and also inflammation. So let's move on to chemicals. So what do chemicals do? Well, they augment phagocytosis. I just kind of talked about that, how the granulocytes help to release their chemicals and kill the cells. And they also send out cytokines, whatever, to bring more cells in. So that's important as well. We also have various chemicals and fluids just throughout our body that help with non-specific, just general immunity. So we have saliva, stomach acid, lysozyme, we've talked about that a little bit, and interferon. So we'll talk about 4 today. So saliva, it's all there, but everybody has it, this dog has a lot of it. But what it does is it helps to wash away bacteria from our teeth and any other kinds of pathogens or unknown substances that come into our mouth. So like I'm starting to cough now a little bit, and that's probably because of the dust. So that's saliva is helping to kind of get it away and get it down my throat and into my stomach acid. Saliva also contains lysozyme. So what does that do? It breaks apart cell walls. So that's important as well. Then stomach acid, it destroys almost all pathogens. So the stomach is about a pH of, I think it's 4, maybe 5. And then once you eat, it takes a nosedive. It goes down to like super acidic. And that's why some people have, like they have trouble with their stomach. They take antacids or they have an ulcer because when you eat, it says, okay, there's something coming down here. Either it's digestion or it's a pathogen, but regardless, the stomach is going to produce a lot of acid so that it can deal with it. So you can see the chart here. Neutral is 7, basic is up to 14, and acidic is down to 0. Oh yeah, there it says may drop to 1 or 2 after a meal. Then we have lacrimal glands. You know about these if you've ever cried. So that's what secrete the tears. And we have them up here just below our eyebrows. And then also we have tear ducts and lacrimal glands. Lacrimal gland, you can just barely see it on this image. It's, it's that little, when you look in your eye, there's that just little tiny part that's right in the middle of your, right there in the center of your eye, right here. And then that really, that has chemicals in it as well as up here, and those will release and then they drop down your tear duct. Okay, and that goes into your nasal sinuses or your nasal cavity, and then again it gets washed by that cilia into your stomach, where that stomach acid just is like done. Okay, so your nose and pharynx, they also have some lacrimal glands, which also contain tears. And what else about tears? Tears are salty. And so the salt in the tears helps to get rid of microbes as well. We have a beautiful immune system, don't we? All right, and lysozyme, you remember, it breaks down polysaccharide walls in bacteria, and it's in tears and saliva. Then the other chemical I'll talk about, which scientists had great hope for this, but it hasn't worked out quite like they wanted it. But this was discovered, I think, in maybe the 70s, or came more into the forefront in the 70s or 80s. But it inhibits the spread of viruses. It stimulates the phagocytic activity of those neutrophils. So similar to, cytokines or whatever, they start, going crazy. Oh, we got something. Let's go get it. Let's eat it up. Let's chop it up. And okay, so I won't go into the other things yet, but scientists thought that by maybe doing nasal interferon, that would help with cold viruses, maybe be a cure, or at least shorten the duration and the length, the severity of viruses. But so they created interferon, synthetic interferon to try that out, but it never really worked. So we're stuck with our own, at least for now. Anyway, so the problem with interferon, I mean, it's great. We love it. And it's wonderful because it helps us get rid of colds and other kinds of viruses, but it also may cause malaise. And malaise is just that feeling you get where you're like, I'm not feeling so good. Something's going on. Either before you're getting a cold, how you're just like, I don't know, or the flu. It just kind of causes that malaise, and it also causes chills and muscle aches. So you all know that, I'm sure. Yeah, and that's due to interferon. And of course, it's also due to some fever and stuff, but interferon is one of the main chemicals that cause that feeling and that reaction. So speaking of inflammation, that is something else that is part of our innate immunity. And this is very important. And I know you've all experienced all parts of inflammation. And I don't know, I kind of love inflammation. I mean, I hate it, but it's genius. All right, so inflammation, you can see here what it is, what it is. In this case, there's a woman, I think it's a woman's hand. The one on your right is like her normal hand, and on the left, that one has a lot of inflammation. So what do you think inflammation is? I'm sure you know. So how do we get inflammation, first of all? All right, so there's that picture of the splinter on the top, and you can see it's red, might be a little bit puffy. And then down on the lower photo, there we have a pimple. And that pimple is a little bit red. It might be a little bit swollen. And it's also got some white pus in it. So what are all those things going on? Well, inflammation, I love this cartoon. Inflammation, it has 5 different parts. The first being heat. So when something happens and your body sends out the inflammation signal, you get a cut or you stub a toe or anything, it kind of gets warm, right? You're starting to feel heat. And then it gets red, and then it starts to swell. And of course, you're feeling pain. And if all of these things are large enough, strong enough, then you lose the function of it because, let's say you break your arm, but it's not like, it's just a crack. It's not like going anyplace. Just the swelling and the inflammation and all of that, you can't even move it because it's just puffy and red and hurts. So what is inflammation? Inflammation is a response to any kind of tissue damage. So it's not that it's actually seeing anything like, like when a cell comes in, your body sends out that, red alert. This is more just, okay, something's happened to this person, this tissue here in their leg, this tissue here on their ear, this tissue on their scalp, whatever, or the splinter or the pimple or whatever. And so your body has a response, just a general response to tissue damage. And basically that releases, the response releases chemicals causing dilation and increased permeability of those vessels. So when that happens, what happens next? Diapedesis, right? So when the granulocytes are coming through, there are chemicals that have increased the permeability of those vessels, and there are tissues that are sending out chemicals like, here's the spot, come and help us out. So histamine is what calls in the cavalry, one of the things, okay? And that calls in, it creates more blood to come and stop in that area, because what's in your blood, all of those good cells that are going to help you with that wound. So what does that do? That causes more heat and more redness. So your blood is warm, your skin isn't necessarily that warm. Remember, the pH is lower and the skin temperature is much lower. But if you've got a lot of blood and it's creating, a little bit of a bump in your arm or something, then there's more heat there. And of course, it's going to be red because there's lots more blood in it. And what this is doing is you're getting more phagocytes in that area. You're getting more oxygen in that area to help with the tissues. And you're also getting nutrients for repair. And those all work together. So this is a cross section of a tissue showing the blood vessel with white cells that have accumulated. Okay, so this blood vessel here was injured. And so all the white cells have kind of migrated there, not all, but a number of them have migrated there, and they're just waiting to get out into that tissue. They're just like, okay, this is it. I just got to get out. I'm coming to help. Okay, so again, histamine and bringing in more phagocytes, more oxygen, more nutrients, which causes the heat and redness of, uh, of inflammation. So here's the migration of the phagocytes. When they get to the walls and they're not ready to diapedese, well, they are ready, but they're not quite there yet. It's when they stick to the walls there, it's called margination. So that just means they've been called in, and it's like, okay, we're here. Let's wait. We're gonna get into those tissues soon. And then they perform diapedesis, which is where they get through the tissues. And so then the area starts tissue repair. The nutrients and the oxygen, as I mentioned, are sent to this area. And then antibacterial chemicals are also delivered. And then also chemicals to clot and to contain and then ingest that bacteria. So that's what our phagocytes are going to do. So here's a little graphic image. In the first image on the left, we have the tissue injury. There's a release of a chemical and signals such as histamine. So the skin surface has now been pricked with a pin, or maybe it's a hypodermic needle or whatever. And there are some bacteria there. So the tissue is sending out those chemical signals. You can see the blood vessel down below with some red cells passing through. The next image, we have the dilation and the leakiness, or opening of those red vessel cells, or pink vessel cells. And we have a bunch of phagocytes that have marginated and are hanging around. And then as soon as they can, they diapedese out, right? And then in the third image, the phagocytes have pretty much consumed any of the bad bacteria or other things that are hanging around there, and all the debris, and the tissue heals. Okay, so what happens? I guess what I want to say, so there's swelling, there's redness and there's heat because of the blood, but there's also swelling. And the swelling is a combination of, all of the blood that's kind of coming into the area, but also some of the fluid that is coming into the area with nutrients and also cells to help to repair. So that's why it gets a little swollen. All right, here's just another image. There's the blood vessel, and we've got a couple of granulocytes there. They've marginated, now they're diapedesing over to the wound. And you can see the bacteria, and there's also some red cells that have gone there. Obviously, we bleed. And so they're going to help clean up the damage right there. The other component of inflammation, which is part of innate immunity, is fever. Okay, now we talked a little earlier about how our pathogens like our body temperature. That's where they're looking to get into somebody, because that's the place they like. That's the temperature they like to live in. So they're not attacking, your dog or your plants or whatever. They're attacking us. So when you have when you have inflammation, let's say you have a flu bug. So a flu virus has entered your body, your lungs. So your body starts sending out chemicals that increases your body's core temperature. So that virus starts to get killed because of the increase in temperature. Doesn't like that increase in temperature. Same with bacteria or fungi, whatever. It doesn't like that temperature that's higher. And so fever is actually a good thing. I mean, it's very uncomfortable. So we take Tylenol or ibuprofen or whatever to reduce it because we're so uncomfortable because of it. But in fact, it is a good thing until you get to a certain point, like adults with, I think it's 103 or 104. I don't remember exactly. I asked my daughter as a nurse. There's a temperature where it becomes dangerous, and we can have, brain injury or, neurological damage. But at some point, but up until that point, it's good for us. It's helping to kill or at least reduce the number of invaders. So it also enhances the effect of interferon. And as I mentioned, it inhibits the growth of some microorganisms, or in fact kills it. And it also enhances the performance of those phagocytes. Also, there's cells of specific immunity and tissue repair that respond well to fever also. They realize something's going on and they are primed, ready to go. Inflammation. It really helps to rid your body of invaders. It's a genius system, just like, everything else in immunity, but it feels terrible. So we don't like it. We take ibuprofen, we take, Tylenol or whatever to get rid of it. And that's perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine. In the old days when we didn't have anything, we relied very heavily on inflammation to get rid of invaders and the rest of our specific immune system. But now, because we have modern medicine, and in particular, we can take care of most bacteria, and viruses pretty much run their course. In most cases, humans are able to eventually win the battle with viruses. Of course, from COVID that is not always the case, but in most cases throughout history, people just relied on their body, their innate immune system, and sometimes their specific immunity to get rid of things by these 5 pillars of inflammation: heat, redness, swelling, pain, and loss of function. So, a summary: your first line of defense is your skin, your mucous membranes, and some chemicals. So in this top image, we see a bunch of bacteria and whatever trying to get in. Most of them don't get in, a few of them do. So then we have our second line of defense, which is phagocytosis, complement. We didn't talk about that. Don't worry about that. Interferon, inflammation, and fever, which is obviously part of inflammation. And that theoretically takes care of pretty much most everything. Not always, but most cases. All right, so non-specific defense, our immunity. Here's the overview. So let's go on the left-hand side first. That's the removal of particles and bacteria, fungi, whatever, by cilia in the nasopharynx, which then will send it down into your stomach. Your intact skin has fatty acids and other chemicals there to help to prevent any bacteria from getting in or kills them on the surface. It also can slough them off. You have commensals. Oh, I haven't mentioned that. So commensals, let's go back to skin. And we also have commensals in your gut. So commensals are bacteria that we like, that are good for us. Remember, we talked about symbiosis, and we have a lot of symbiotic organisms. As a matter of fact, I think I told you we have more bacteria than we have our own cells. We have lots and lots of bacteria in our gut. And so those commensals, we call them, they help to keep out bad bacteria. There's so many of them that if one little nasty one gets in there, they don't have a chance because they can't get the nutrients that all of our commensal or our good bacteria are eating, and so they don't really get a chance. But of course, sometimes they do, but in most cases they don't. And then the same is with our skin. We have a lot of natural good bacteria and fungi, viruses, even mostly bacteria on our skin, which also crowds out all the bad bugs. Okay. So continuing on, vaginal acid, female in their vag has, it's acidic, and so that helps. It's mucous membranes, so that too helps to prevent pathogens. It keeps it a little bit acidic, so certain organisms like yeast or other things don't generally have an ability to take hold. And sometimes they do, obviously. Lysozyme, we have lysozyme in our tears and our saliva and certain other areas. And then we have mucus lining our trachea, and that has cilia, and the mucus helps to grab anything that's going down, and then the cilia helps to bring it up. We also have a rapid pH change in our gut, which can help to kill anything that gets down there. And then, of course, we're urinating, and so we're flushing out our urinary tract. And you might have heard you've got to drink lots of water and keep that urinary tract flushed out, and that's the reason. It's like if you let it sit in there, then there's more chance that bacteria are migrating in. So anyway, lots of water. All right, so here's what we covered. Non-specific defense. We have external and internal components. In the external area, we have skin, which includes our epidermis and our dermis, and mucous membranes. Internally, we have blood, chemicals, and inflammation. And mom's chicken soup sometimes helps get us well too. All righty. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk about specific immunity next time.